Let's talk about the commission lawsuit, shall we? Well, I know most of you have probably heard about what's going on with the commission lawsuit, and it's been all over the news. There's factual information going on, and there's also a lot of misconceptions of what's going on with real estate commissions and what it's going to do to housing prices, what the impacts are for realtors, for buyers, for sellers. So I've been called over the last week since this settlement was reached last Friday by National Association of Realtors and the plaintiffs in the trial. My dad called me, my family, friends, clients have been reaching out, just wondering what my thoughts are on everything here. So I figured it'd be easiest just to put out a video. I already sent out an email to my database of clients, family, and friends. But for those who are not on my email list, I'm going to go ahead and give you this post here. So basically what it is, this lawsuit started in 2019. It's known as the Sitzer-Burnett trial, started in Kansas City, Missouri. Sellers claimed that, the commissions that they're paying were unfair, that paying a buyer's agent commission as a seller is not fair because you're paying a buyer's agent to negotiate against your best interests, and you, the home seller, should only be paying the listing agent. So yeah, they have a point, absolutely. The other part of the lawsuit, the claim was that National Association of Realtors and all the brokerages that are involved with National Association of Realtors have conspired to essentially, or have colluded to keep commissions high for price stabilization, essentially violating the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So those were the two big claims by the plaintiffs in this case. This is just making news now because this case, for a while, I believe, was dropped, and then the Department of Justice picked it back up in 2021, and it went to trial last fall. And after going to trial, the jury deliberated for a whole 6, 7, 8 hours one day, and they found National Association of Realtors and all these brokerages guilty. And so that, the settlement that NAR came to last Friday was after having appealed this decision last October. So that's why it's a big deal, because National Association of Realtors, instead of continuing the appeal process, they settled, said, okay, what we're going to do is, part of the settlement agreement is they're paying $418 million and implementing two rules. The first rule that we're seeing, of all this has to be approved by a judge. So none of this is final, even though the expectations are it will be approved by a judge. First rule, it prohibits sellers and listing agents from putting the buyer's agent co-op in the MLS. Okay, that's the first rule. So when I'm working as a buyer's agent, I go show a client a property, I can see on the MLS what is being offered from the listing agent for my commission and co-op, for bringing a buyer to buy the house. That will no longer be there. So I won't know if I'm going to be getting paid from the seller. I'll have to call the listing agent, or I'll have to negotiate that commission with the home buyer. Okay, that's rule number one. Rule number two, buyer's agents will now need to have a buyer agency agreement signed with the buyer before visiting a property. Now, that will throw a little bit of a wrench into my business. I typically don't like to have my buyer agency signed, my buyer agency agreement, which we've had in Colorado since the 1990s, until I've demonstrated my value to the buyer. I want them to know that they can trust me. They can, they know they're going to get valuable information from me, that I've earned to be their buyer's agent and their realtor. So my concern with that one is having to provide a buyer agency agreement without even having demonstrated value for this buyer. So, you're going to see a lot of buyers end up working with agents that they don't know and haven't demonstrated that value. So that's my concern with that one. But we're going to evolve, we're going to adapt. So a little bit of background of how real estate agents came to be. How did buyer's agents come to be? So National Association of Realtors was created in 1908, so it's been around well over a century. It used to be that a seller would go to one brokerage to sell their property, okay, and only that brokerage had the listing. Okay, so buyers would have to go from brokerage to brokerage to brokerage, or just drive around and look for sale signs. That wasn't very efficient. Finally, in the 1960s, National Association of Realtors created the Multiple Listing Service, or MLS. And the MLS essentially allowed brokerages to share each other's listings. So they would put it in a big book every month, every 2 months, depending on the market. If it's in a city, every 2 weeks. And everybody would get a copy of the MLS book that you'd get all the brokerages listings, right? But you still only had the agents working for the sellers. They then hired sub-agents, which would then go and show these folks the properties to work for the head listing agent. But that sub-agent was actually working for the seller's best interests. And it wasn't until the 1990s when homebuyers, enough disenfranchised homebuyers, were frustrated with not having representation in the purchase of real estate. Thus came about buyer agency. Okay, so buyer agency obviously came about from enough buyers becoming disenfranchised, and now they are going to be paid from the seller. So this has been going on for 30 years, and it wasn't an issue until 2019 when the market was rolling and it seemed very easy to sell a property, that enough sellers said, wait a second, why are we paying the buyer's agent a commission if they're negotiating against our best interests? For example, they're negotiating to get our roof replaced when we don't think it needs to be replaced. Okay, so that was kind of the background of this lawsuit, feeling that the buyer should be paying their commission. Okay, so all of that is to give you kind of a background of how agency works and how buyer's agency came to be. Now, again, where this is going to go moving forward, nobody knows. But I think there's some common misconceptions about agency and commission. So I think the good things that are going to come from this: more transparency around agency commissions. Who's paying the commission? How much are they paying? What's the value they're getting from paying this commission? So I think that's a good thing. The more transparency, the better. I'm happy to talk about commissions. Most agents have been at home sellers' tables and had to negotiate a commission. So the idea that commissions are not negotiable, that's that's just not true. The agent or the commissions have always been negotiable. Okay. Now, what maybe hasn't been as negotiable is the buyer agency commission. So in order to input that listing into the MLS, you need to offer some form of a co-op or commission to the buyer's agent. So that's the part that has not been as negotiable. Now, because of this lawsuit and the results here, that part will become more negotiable. Now, I think who this will impact the most are first-time home buyers and buyers using like FHA loans and VA loans. For example, a vet who wants to buy a house using a VA loan, part of the VA lending guidelines is that that buyer cannot pay anybody's commission. Okay, so it has to be the seller paying that commission. So let's just play a hypothetical scenario. You have a very nice house and the VA buyer is going to put an offer in against a buyer using conventional financing. That buyer using conventional financing says, I can pay some of my buyer's agent commission. The VA buyer cannot. So that VA buyer is already at a disadvantage in their competitive offer scenario. So that is one way that I don't think this has been fully evaluated and how this is going to impact home buyers and home buyers who have little money, first-time home buyers, FHA, and VA buyers. They don't have a lot of money to bring to the table anyway, outside of their down payment and the closing costs. Typically, closing costs to buy a home are about 1 to 1.5%. That's paying for the loan to be originated, lending fees, title fees, any HOA and insurance premiums and prepaids that they have to pay into their escrow account. All that adds up to about 1 to 1.5%. And now we're going to be expecting the buyer to pay out of pocket on top of that for a buyer agent commission. Now, I'll also argue this. Who pays the commissions? Is it the seller or is it the buyer? I will argue that the buyers pay the commission regardless. The commissions are baked into the purchase price. Okay, so without a buyer and a bank to purchase a property, there's no seller proceeds, there's no listing agent commission, and there's no buyer agent commission. You need a buyer to buy that property for any funds to transfer into anybody's pockets. Without a successful sale, there are no commissions. So it's not like the sellers are paying out of pocket for a buyer's agent in advance. they only pay that once they get their funds, right? So on the settlement statement, yes, the seller is paying a buyer's agent. Now, if you have a good listing agent, the listing agent will prep the seller on what their estimated net proceeds would be after the commission before you even take this to sale. That's where the transparency needs to come in, and agents need to do a better job of educating the sellers of the value that you're going to get by paying these commissions. Now, maybe there is no value in paying a buyer's agent commission. If you put a property up and 20 buyers want it, then at that point you have all the leverage and you can drive down that commission on buyer's agency, which I think will happen. But that's the market we're in now. If we're in a market like 2009 or 2010 and it's really hard to sell a property, then I think those buyer agency commissions will come back. So it's also a symptom of the marketplace. Okay, so it's hard to know where we're going to go from here. I'm not going to try to speculate too much, but I do think a good thing is that realtors, agents will have to be demonstrating our value to sellers and buyers. That's a good thing. Let's talk about commissions. Let's talk about our value proposition. On my average listing, I'm investing between $3,000 to $5,000 just to take a house to market. And that's before getting paid. It's an upfront investment in my clients. That's part of my value proposition. That's part of the media package, the cleaning, the window washing, the staging, that a lot of agents may or may not offer. But I'm happy to have these conversations. Let's talk about our value proposition as a buyer's agent and as a listing agent. So that's the good thing that's going to come from all this. Where else it's going to go, I don't know. I think it will create a lot of confusion initially once approved and implemented in July. But I just wanted to give you my thoughts on the whole thing. I know this is a long video, but there's a lot to come from this. And change, can be a good thing in the marketplace. But for you, if you're thinking of selling or buying a home, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the pros and cons of selling in the next 3 months. I'm pretty sure buyer's agents are going to be highly motivated to bring their buyers in the next 3 months when they can get a 2.5 or 2.8% guaranteed commission to after where the commission is completely unknown. So we'll see how that affects demand after July as well. All right, thanks for tuning in. There's a lot more to come from this, and let's keep the conversation going. Transparency is a good thing.